So we had an addition to our house this week with a new piece of furnishing, and that is this pew that came from the Alma College Chapel. And some of you may remember we're involved in in pledging some funds from our church to help them remodel that chapel. And as they were doing so, they were getting rid of some of these old pews, and Melanie said, gosh, that would look great in our entryway. And so that is what I'm sitting on today, this pew from 1940. But as I decided that this would be the place that we should do this devotional, the reason for that was I wanted to do a devotional that was focused on the idea of prayer. Now, not too long ago, during the high school youth group's mission project, I went out and I was doing the devotional for them, and they had been talking that day about prayer, and one of them asked about that, and they said, how do you know that God is listening to your prayers, and how do you actually pray, or what do you do when you pray? And I thought about that, and I thought, well, I could give them the pastoral answer and sound all fancy and everything else when it comes to talking about prayer, or I could just be honest with them. And so what I honestly said with them is, as much as I think prayer is important, I sometimes struggle with prayer. Not so much praying in public, like when I'm leading a worship service or opening a meeting or something like that. I do fine with that. It's that personal, quiet time of prayer that sometimes I struggle with. One of the reasons I struggle with that is I used to always think that the best time for me to pray was right before I went to bed at night. My mom and dad used to teach me this, that we're supposed to do our prayers before we go to bed. And we'd always do that prayer, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, boy, that one just scared me to death. And I remember always tagging in that other little line, and I would say, God, that whole thing about death, I would really rather just live if you don't mind. But anyway, as I got older and I continued that habit of praying at night, the problem was I would be so tired that I would fall asleep in the middle of my prayer. And then I would feel guilty that I fell asleep in the middle of my prayer. And so you know what? That prayer at night really didn't do anything more than cause more guilt, which is not the purpose of prayer. So as I've gotten older, I've learned that prayer needs to be something different, that my prayer life needs to be different than the folding my hands and closing my eyes and doing that little canned prayer. But what does it look like? What is prayer supposed to be? I was reminded of a very simple verse from 1 Thessalonians. This is towards the end of what was probably Paul's first letter to one of his churches. At the very end of it, he has two little verses among the shortest verses in all of Scripture. The first one, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 16 and 17 say this: "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing." That's it. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing. Well, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about, really, what does that look like to pray without ceasing? And around that same time, as God would have it, I was reading a devotional by Richard Rohr, and he was talking about prayer. And he said this, he said, when spiritual teachers invite us to pray, they are in effect saying, go inside and know yourself. Now, I really had to think about that a little bit, because prayer is about what we do and how we approach God, right? But go inside and know yourself. What I basically began to understand from what he was saying is prayer is the way where I become aware of God in my own life. So sometimes what prayer is it's simply a reflection on what has been going on in my life, and it's a way of bringing God into my life. It's a way of me recognizing that God can connect with me and is connecting with me. And that's where this prayer without ceasing really comes up. Because if I'm praying without ceasing, I'm always reminding myself, or at least trying to remind myself, is where is God in this moment? And that is what prayer has become for me. Asking myself, where is God in this moment? Bringing God into this moment. Sometimes when I'm not doing so well, it's bringing God into that moment where I'm going to have to confess. Sometimes when things are going great, it's bringing God into that moment where I'm celebrating. But that's what prayer is about. In the Roar devotional I was reading, he goes on to quote Thomas Keating, who wrote this. He said, "The chief thing that separates us from God is the thought that we are separated from God. If we get rid of that thought, our troubles will be greatly reduced. If we fail to believe that we are always with God and that God is a part of every reality, the present moment, every object we see in our inmost nature is rooted in God." Again, that's Keating's way of poetically saying, bring God into your moment. Bring God into your everyday moment. Pray without ceasing. Let every moment you experience be connected with God. I love that way of thinking about prayer. Bringing God into the moment to help you know yourself in light of God. That's what that means. Prayer is bringing God into the moment. So perhaps this will help all of us, including myself, recognize the way to pray and the way to bring God into our lives and our lives into the presence of God. Thank you all.